Perfect. Okay, so thank you everybody who's joining us today. I have a awesome guest who's going to educate me if that can be done, because I'm an orthopedic surgeon. But he has agreed to chat with me for the next little bit to speak about something that I recently posted a video on. So as many of you know, I posted a video about some of the health effects of obesity and how we should think about that and what we can do about that. And so I got lots of feedback, lots of positive and some negative. And so I'd like to make an effort here to learn a little bit more about this condition, and then speak to somebody who is a specialist in this to learn about how better to think about that, and how what things I can do to help this this issue moving forward. So I want to thank Yoni Freedhoff for agreeing to speak with me for the next hour, and I'm I'm greatly appreciative of him taking the time to join us today. So Yoni, thank you very much.
It's really my pleasure. Thank you, Chris.
All right, so let's get this started. And I got a list of questions here, and we're going to start right away from the top. And Yoni, this is a framework, so don't feel like tied to this.
I will be happy to ramble, no problem.
Perfect. The discussion will go wherever it goes. All right. So one of the first things when I reached out to you about feedback on the video, you talked a little bit about privilege. So please tell me, how does privilege play a role in dealing with obesity?
I think what people forget many times is that when we're talking about lifestyle specifically and its impact on obesity, presumably to help people lose weight and maintain that weight loss, that it's an intentional behavior change that is required in perpetuity around something that is challenging, consequent to millions of years of evolution. We have thousands, literally thousands of genes, dozens of hormones involved in the regulation of different behaviors that are associated with weight. Our levels of hunger, our levels of craving, our fullness levels. How long does it take us to feel full? How long do we feel full for? And to the emotional impact of food. So food absolutely has an emotional impact for all of us. It decreases our body's cortisol levels, but I think for some people, it has more of an impact and more of a benefit. I bring up all those things because we are talking about something that is not as straightforward as, well, just eat less and move more. And I'm not suggesting you were saying that, you weren't. But I think that taking a step even further back, I think about the people that I work with in my practice. So we run a couple of programs that are funded by the Ministry of Health. So there's no cost to people. And as a consequence, we're not just seeing people who can afford to come in and say hi. We're seeing everybody from all over the place, and especially with the pandemic and virtual care, we're really getting a glimpse into people's lives from a different perspective than we did before. And I can tell you that the amount of privilege required to intentionally change your behavior around food and fitness forever is really high. The world is a hard place. It's a very difficult place, whether it's we have our own medical concerns and issues, whether we are providing care for a child or a parent who is struggling with their health or mental health or physical health, whether we have chronic pain, whether we have financial concerns, whether we have time concerns, whether we even have kitchens and gyms and access to things to make these changes is not a given. And so sometimes I feel like the discussion around weight management specifically forgets that. And it just assumes that everybody, if they just wanted it badly enough, would make it happen, and forget that food has many roles beyond just nutrition. Food plays a role in every aspect of our lives. For some people, it may be one of the very few consistent pleasures that they have. And here we are saying that you need to be able not only to sort of deal with this on your own, but also to swim against the current of those millions of years of evolution that have created a circumstance where in this modern day food environment, the default is gain. And that's not to say people can't affect changes through lifestyle. People can. It's just that the assumption that if someone isn't doing so, that they are doing that as a choice, where I would argue that for a very large percentage of people, that choice is a luxury they literally do not have.
Okay. So one of the things that you touched on there is about access to food and types of food that people eat. And so one of the things people have asked me in the past to do educational sessions for athletes on nutrition. And I always tell them, I'm not a nutritionist. I am an orthopedic surgeon. I can give you some basic guidelines about what to eat and what not to eat. But one of the things that will come up as a result of those conversations is people talking about the price of food and the inverse relationship between the quality of food and the price of food. So why is it that good food is so difficult for those with low socioeconomic status to access?
Well, so I think it's we don't want to simplify things too much. I think that the reason that food that is hyper palatable and junky, so to speak, is less expensive in many cases is because the main ingredients are salt, sugar, fat. And those are not expensive ingredients. Like, they're very inexpensive ingredients. And together they create the bliss point and the hyper palatability point where people can consume amounts that are sort of greater than perhaps they would if they were eating, whole, unprocessed foods. And there's actually been a few studies here and there trying to look at the difference. There may be differences in the speed people can consume these foods. There may be difference in the protein contents of these foods, where there's a protein leverage hypothesis, where if you're not getting X amount of calories from protein with your foods, you might be more likely to eat more. And so that might be one of the reasons ultra-processed foods are a challenge for people. They may have a different impact on the thermic effect of food, how many calories we burn. But at the end of the day, it's not just about the ingredients, right? So lentils are cheap, beans are cheap. And sometimes people, get a carton of eggs for, not a lot of money. Like, these are not expensive foods. They're healthy choices, so to speak, but they require time. They require effort. They require a kitchen. They require tools. And that's a lot. And that's a lot for a lot of people. Whereas, again, foods that are easily accessible, not particularly expensive, providing joy to themselves or to their family members, or comfort, or whatever you might have, they're readily accessible. I think the other thing really worth pointing out, though, is that a lot of times people who have this discussion, who talk about, good food, bad food, they forget the fact that lots of people who are lean and fit and athletic and muscular eat piles of junk food too. It's not as if and so there's this sort of creation of this mythic person, that everybody who's lean eats really healthy food. And that's nonsense. It's just not the case. Just some people are genetically gifted, or, have other privileges and other, abilities that allow them to maintain lower weights than others. But that does not mean they're not enjoying junk food as well. I think it's a guilty pleasure for all of us. And the idea or suggestion, which I'm not throwing it on you. I'm not saying you're saying this, but definitely.
I'm orthopedic surgeon. I got big, broad shoulders, man. It's okay.
People do suggest it all the time, or they infer it, that, people with obesity are the only people who eat and enjoy foods that are indulgent and ultra processed. And everybody does, especially, everybody, me included, probably you included too. It's just the way the world is. And, we're all amazingly good hunters, and there's great food to be had. And we have it because that's what we are.
Yeah. It's interesting. As you were speaking, I was thinking back to my childhood. And I'm a first-generation Canadian. My parents were immigrants from Jamaica. And both my parents, grade 9 education, and they were factory workers, okay? So when I was young, when my parents were kind of working, trying to support 3 kids in the country, and then an additional 3 kids that were still left behind in Jamaica, they spent a lot of time working. And if I look at the quality and the nature of the foods, it wasn't just a function of what they could afford, but as you said, time is also an issue as well. And so when my parents were working in the factories, And then they would both get home at 5 o'clock, and then they got to feed 3 kids. They would tend to, when I think back to those times, the foods tend to be more processed, easy to prepare, quick meals. Whereas afterwards, when both of my parents retired, that stuff, my mother would never make it. Like, she would always make a big meal, like, and all from whole foods, from everything from scratch, right? And likewise on weekends, when they weren't working, they would be making all this stuff from scratch. So part of it was having to do with money, but that's not the only thing that is something that plays into this.
And I would bet that your parents coming from Jamaica probably had cooking skills,
yes,
especially back then, right? So
yes.
I think now there are families that are 2-3 generations away from regular home cooking. And we don't teach it in school anymore, at least not usefully. So there's no useful home economics. I think there should be, but there is no useful home economics to ensure kids who graduate high school can cook 10 meals from fresh whole ingredients that are inexpensive and healthful and tasty and easy to do. And then if you're born in a family where, for various reasons, there's not a lot of cooking, well, there's probably not going to be a lot of cooking because there's not a lot of knowledge there. And then that then persists to the next generation and the next generation. And again, so I'm guessing we're relatively close in age, you and I, back when we were kids, the ultra-processed offerings were a lot less. The fast food availability, it existed, but it was not as ubiquitous as it is now. So it is even easier now to rely on and to utilize, these types of foods. And then if you don't have a background, and it's something that we hear, so we run a program for parents of children with obesity, where the kids are between the ages of 5 and 12. We never see the kids except for an emotional resilience class that's branded differently. But when we work with these families, and we work with these parents, in many cases, one of the challenges for cooking is that cooking gets rejected by a spouse, by the kids. We don't like this, Mom. We don't like this, Dad. I don't want to eat this. That's a real challenge too. And again, if you've got no cooking skills and you've got no time and you've got a chronic medical problem and you've got a kid who's got some special needs, etc., like, I can imagine why this is not a priority. I don't think it necessarily should be a priority. I don't know that I would prioritize it in sort of where I do now if I had those challenges facing me as well.
Yeah, and when you think about the ease, like Uber Eats, DoorDash, whatever, it's like anything that you want, you just enter it into the app, and then half an hour later, 45 minutes later, it shows up at your door, right?
And then somebody out there who's listening likely is thinking, well, it takes 45 minutes to cook something, so what's the difference? The difference is one involves effort. Yes. And people are, again, life is hard. And so this idea that effort is free is something that I think permeates the discourse around this as well.
All right, let's shift gears a little bit here. So one of the things that I talked about was set point theory. And, as with anything in medicine or in science for that matter, we have things that there are a few things which are law, canon, and then most everything else is a theory, right? And so set point theory is one particular theory of obesity. And you mentioned, and a few people had mentioned, how they don't believe in set point theory. So, or that's not, I shouldn't say that's what you said. You said you didn't like set point theory. So the question is, do you believe in set point theory? And if not, why not?
Sure. So I think, and thank you for the clarification. I do think it's, a strong word. Belief is a much stronger word than like. There's no question. It depends partly on how the term is being wielded. So I think people use the term poorly. So there's no question there is something called metabolic adaptation, which is a broad-based term to describe how the body changes as a consequence to weight loss. And we know that when weight is lost, especially large quantities, and potentially especially with lifestyle, actually, and I'll come back to that in a second, but that metabolism slows down, maybe body temperature changes. There's the work of Herman Poncer, if we're talking about exercise, how there might be this point where more exercise doesn't lead to more burning because we slow down when we're not exercising, and potentially even muscles we can't control slow down when we're not doing things. So that there's this constrained energy expenditure model, if people wanted to look it up, which is fascinating stuff. Anyhow, back to set point theory. I have a few challenges with it. So one challenge is why set points have been increasing for many decades now. We know that if we look at those classic, slides of weight over time, that there are massive changes to the average weight over the course of the past 50, 60 years. Those graphs from the CDC that change color, and now they have to make new colors because people have gained so much weight. It's difficult to imagine there's been a lot of genetic changes over that time that have changed our set points over that time. And so that challenges set point theory. The other thing that challenges set point theory for me is immigration. So plenty of times we'll hear stories about people whose set points change suddenly when they get to a new country. So that for me challenges set point theory as well. And that they can change in both directions, of course, depending on where people go. And I've seen that in my practice as well. So that I find challenging. I do think that everybody sort of has their own fuel economy. We have, we're a black box. Food goes in the top, it comes out the bottom. What happens in between is individual. And so, fuel economy, you can drive your car hard and you can drive your car carefully, and you'll have very different mileage either way. And so I do think we are constrained within our own fuel economies. But I think the other huge player that we sometimes mistakenly describe as set point theory would be psychosocial set point. That's my own term. Basically what it would be describing is we have lives. We have lives where we have specific friends and job requirements and things that we do for fun and things that we kick back with. A lot of those things will revolve around food. Sometimes it'll be travel for work or for pleasure. Sometimes it'll be we go out with our friends for dinner, or we do this or we do that. And then a person goes on a diet, and they dial a lot of that stuff back in, because that's what traditional dieting tends to be, is restriction. And so they restrict, and then suddenly they get sick of restricting anymore. People don't like suffering forever, so they stop. And what do they go back to? They go back to their old lives with all their old amounts of travel, all their old dietary choices, because that was the life they were living. And guess what? Those choices and those lifestyles bring back the same calories they had before they started their diets, and they go back to the same weight they used to have. Not because there's a set point genetically saying you must be this weight, but because this lifestyle leads to that weight. This lifestyle brings in this amount of daily energy. And I don't believe there's been good studies that would suss out all of those components, but I will say that there's no question that metabolic adaptation exists. But I think we use the term set point too liberally to suggest that people are doomed to try.
So having said all of that, is there any part of the set point theory that you think is worthwhile?
Well, I mean, again, it's how it's wielded. So yeah, I do think it's worthwhile for people to appreciate that, their bodies will be involved in deciding, in a sense, how much a particular lifestyle or approach will allow them to lose weight. And that includes pharma options in terms of the medications that are now utilized. It includes bariatric surgery. Not everybody who has surgery will lose the same amount of weight. Some of that might be modifiable on the basis of choices. Although, again, as we were talking about before, choice is an illusion for a lot of people. But sometimes it's just the way they're put together. I think of it a little bit like school. So, you can go to class, do your homework, and study as hard as you can, but not every kid studying the same amount is going to get the same grade. And not every kid studying as hard as they can is going to get an A+. It doesn't mean they're not doing their best. And I am somebody who my entire philosophy is, let's help people do their best, but respect the fact that not everybody's best is the same, and that our best efforts change day to day, month to month, year to year, circumstance to circumstance. And so I think that when it comes to set point, and these sorts of discussions, sometimes it forgets those aspects of things. So yeah, I think people have limits that they cannot, levers that they cannot push, which will affect their weights. But to suggest that, you know, everybody's doomed to be a particular weight because of their set point, I think is problematic.
Mm-hmm. As you were talking, I was thinking back to my my consult clinic this week, and I'll just go off the rails here for a second. Just tell you a little story. So I had a patient that I was seeing in consultation for the first time, and she happens to be a friend. She happened to bring a friend with her who was also a patient of mine. Okay. Now, the reason that these two women are friends is because they discovered each other through bariatric surgery program. And so they were both about the same size, and they both had bariatric surgery at the same time. And so the one patient who was my existing patient, I saw her when she was her heaviest. I saw her partway through her, after she'd had surgery, she'd gone through the program, she lost a significant amount of weight. And then I've noticed over the last maybe year and a half, well, no, actually during COVID, that she gained back quite a significant amount of that weight. So, so there was that person, she was the friend. Then I saw the other woman for the first time who in consultation this week. And again, at the start, they were about the same size. They both lost about the same amount of weight. But for whatever reason, the new patient that I saw for the first time, you could see that she had had much better ability for whatever reasons during COVID to maintain what she had lost. Because when you saw them together sitting by side, I already knew that the other woman had gained back a large amount of weight. But when you saw them sitting side by side, then it was even more striking, right? And so that just made me think about, you know, what you were talking about, and just all of these behaviors, and that, you know, there are many things that go into affecting how people respond to even to the interventions.
That's right. And so a couple points. So first is, I will tell you, nobody chooses this. So this is not a choice people make. So the patient you're describing did not choose to regain a whole bunch more weight. This was not a choice. Yep. And I'll tell you, actually, looking at bariatric surgical patients specifically, there was a study done that looked at whether a person would rather lose their vision, get cancer, lose a limb, or gain their weight back after bariatric surgery. And uniformly, they would rather one of those other things than to gain their weight back. So the impact weight has on a person's health and quality of life who chooses to undergo bariatric surgery is very high. That doesn't mean everybody with a high weight has significant medical or quality of life concerns. But those who undergo bariatric surgery, clearly they're going through something that's significant. Theirs did. Now, you mentioned that interventions don't always help. I'll give you an example from my life. So in August 2020, I was exercising. I've got a home gym, thankfully, and I'm in the gym and I'm exercising like I always do. And I start having an irregular heartbeat. I'm feeling ectopy. And you know, I've felt some flutters here and there before. Everybody has, but this was more persistent. Anyhow, I didn't think too much about it. A couple days go by, keeps happening. I call some cardiology friends and I ask them, listen, this is what's going on. What should I do? Do I need to get investigations? What lifestyle changes could I make? And they said, okay, well, cut out alcohol and cut out caffeine and work on your sleep and continue with your exercise, maybe meditate, like all that good lifestyle stuff. So I did all that stuff. And part of me was thrilled that cutting out alcohol and caffeine did not help because I enjoy both. But you know, I did everything I was told to do, and I did it like perfectly. I literally did not have a drop of anything. I kept up with my exercise. I really focused on good sleep. Things got worse. And by December of 2020, I ended up admitted to the Heart Institute for 3 nights because my arrhythmia became dangerous. And I felt unsafe, and certainly the rhythm strips suggested indeed I was unsafe. I had a Holter at the time I was admitted, and anyhow, got admitted. saw a great cardiologist and got put on medications. And so I got put on a couple of medications. They have minimal side effects, but I'm on them.
Mhm.
I bring this up because I did not choose to have an arrhythmia. I did not want to have an arrhythmia. I did everything that for some people was enough to make it go away, and it didn't go away. And thank God there's meds that I could go on that would help me. And I'll wax on slightly longer. So one of the things that I see a lot in weight management is people talking about, do I need to be on a medication forever for weight management? Because there are meds. Maybe we'll talk about them in a bit, but there are useful meds now. And one of the knocks is we need to be on it forever. And it's funny because I explain that if you have a chronic medical condition and you stop treatment, there are no temporary treatments for long-term conditions. But even that being said, I'm feeling pretty good. This has happened at least twice since 2020. I'm like, my arrhythmia is really well controlled. Maybe I don't have it anymore. And so I stopped the medication, and sure enough, within weeks, I'm back to being on the meds because it comes back. So all this to say is I'm really thrilled that we actually have treatments that go beyond lifestyle for weight management now, just like we do for a very large majority of other chronic non-communicable conditions and diseases.
Okay, so we're going to come back to some of the points that you mentioned there later on. But what are some of the factors that you believe influence one's weight equilibrium or homeostasis? And you did mention some of those things, I think.
Yeah, so I think a ton of them are sort of the lives that we're living, for sure, in terms of the stuff we've already touched on: time, skill sets, money, health, wellness, etc. And then there are the genes. We know, again, thousands of genes, dozens of hormones. And sadly, we aren't at a place yet. We probably will be one day. We're just not at a place yet where I could run a panel of tests and say, oh, you've got this gene, this gene, this gene. So your struggles are a consequence of this pathway, that pathway, and the other pathway. And here is either a pharmaceutical treatment or a lifestyle change that's going to make it better. But again, I do believe that is the primary driver for the vast majority of people, are things that are wholly beyond their control. And to some degree, lifestyle is beyond our control as well. It really, again, I know people have this romantic notion, including people with obesity, have this romantic notion that if you just want it badly enough, you'll make it happen. We're swimming against really strong currents here. And that doesn't mean swimming lessons are a bad idea. I run a swimming lesson office. That's what we do. But it also means that we need to provide some tools beyond just how do you do the front crawl. We need to provide life preservers and maybe jet skis and other things to help move people along, because again, this current is not one that we can modify just by wanting it to go away. Now, does dietary choice have an impact? Sure. So that some foods are more sating, they're more filling than other foods. A calorie is not just a calorie from a health perspective or from a how hungry you're going to be later perspective. But I think those become rather esoteric discussions that, again, fall really into the laps of people with the greatest degree of privilege to pursue. And the societal sort of discourse around weight management actually dissuades people from trying to make changes and sustain them that might not lead them to some A+ amount of weight loss. And I think, again, accepting reality where doesn't mean you can't affect weight loss and sustain it, but it might mean that, no, you're not going to go from a BMI of 40 to a BMI of 23 just because you really want to. That the likelihood is low. Those people exist. We've had them in our program. They're just so rare. And they're not rare because the people who didn't get there didn't want it as badly. It's because there are so many levers we just can't move.
Okay. So this next question is a bit of a trick question, not because I'm trying to trick you, but it's just a trick question because by asking it, I am implying something, but I have my own position on this anyway. But I'm going to ask it for the sake of everybody listening. I'm going to ask. So one of the things I talked about in the video, saying that not all diets are successful, and in the article that I referenced or whatever, they had said 95% of all diets. Right. So what, from your point of view, what percentage of diets actually fail?
Well, so here's the challenge is how are we determining success? What is success and what is failure? So the 95% number, first of all, comes from a very long time ago, barely a study piece that looked at things. But, putting it aside, I think that for the vast majority of people who wield that number, what it means is people with obesity don't end up as being people without necessarily the medical definition of obesity. We're looking for total weight loss. And so the percentage of diets that lead to total weight loss, to normalizing one's weight, I'd say is very low, probably in that 95% or even worse realm.
Mhm.
The thing is I don't think that's what we should be determining success as being. If we look at what percentage of people can sustain a clinically meaningful weight loss, which may be 5% of a person's body weight or 10% of a person's body weight, the number is probably closer to the 30-35% mark. And that's for all sorts of different diets. There's no best diet. I'm an egalitarian. We have people on every which diet in our office, from traditional balanced deficit diets to low fat diets to vegan diets to keto diets. We have one intermittent fasting carnivore. If you like your diet and it's helping you maintain improvements to your health or your quality of life, we'll support you and just make sure you're medically safe and sound. But going back to the question of success, it really is just, where do you set your goalposts? The other goalpost that I think people never set, and should, is not gaining. Not gaining is a victory as well in this society, but nobody discusses it as victory. And I think that, for instance, I'm not sure what percentage of your audience might be, for instance, family physicians or primary care providers, but I think that's a very realistic thing that primary care providers and other family physicians could be focusing on, is trying to help stop weight gain amongst their patients, rather than this belief that we need to all lose and lose lots in order for us to be determined or called a success story. So I don't know if that's a good answer, but that would be the answer that I've got. Yeah.
It's all good, man. It's all good. So
Yeah.
listen, so given what you've already mentioned about lifestyle and the influence of lifestyle on metabolism and homeostasis, I guess this is a two-part question. So number one, our diets, and when I say diets, I'm talking about, as you mentioned, like specific, keto, carnivore, this, blah, 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 all the different names. Are diets worthwhile? And then part two of that, should we even consider diets when it comes to weight management, or should we take our focus completely away from diets and think about in terms of lifestyle instead?
So I think that if we're talking about primary care providers, I think lifestyle should be explored with every single patient, regardless of their weight. I don't think a person's weight should determine whether there should be a discussion around food and fitness and cooking and eating behaviors, etc. When it comes to should we be encouraging or discouraging specific diets, I don't think there's anything wrong with people trying things on for size. I think it's important, however, for clinicians to counsel people into appreciating that if they don't like the diet or the life that they're living when they're losing their weight, they're probably going to gain it back when they decide they can't live with it anymore. Now, probably the world's dumbest diets have some success stories. So, I really do think it's not a bad thing for people to try different things on for size, but I'd be very leery and wary of any clinician who suggested there was only one right way to go that would work for everybody, because that's definitely not the case. When we look at studies of different diets, and waterfall plots, I love waterfall plots visually from a diet perspective. Basically, they show every single individual in the intervention and whether they lost or gained weight. What we see for pretty much every diet is that there's some people who do extremely well on it, some people who do mediocre, that's the majority of people, and some people actually gain. And, trying to help people figure out what is the healthiest life they can actually enjoy living is valuable. That might involve counseling around diet, but does it involve just prescribing a specific diet? No. And so what we'll do is we'll work collaboratively with patients, and they'll keep food diaries, and we'll do experiments. And what we're trying to figure out is, what pattern of eating whether it's macronutrients, whether it's timing, whatever. But what pattern of eating leaves you the most satisfied with the smallest amount of energy intake that you can actually enjoy and still indulge in, like food, and be a normal human being? And there's no one right way to go, that's for sure. But I would argue that the more extreme the approach, from veganism to keto and everything in between, the extremes are more challenging for people. They're more involved, and again, they require things, and they require attention to details. They require strictness that can challenge the most well-intentioned and eager person. And I wonder how many people have fallen into the trap of listening to some particular diet guru, deciding that I can't hack this, so I can't improve my diet or my lifestyle at all, and I'm out. And it's unfortunate, because there's lots of in-betweens and imperfections that we can embrace to improve health and quality of life.
Okay. Now, you did mention this a little while ago, sort of in passing, but I'm going to come back to this because I want to drill down on this particular point. How should we frame the conversation about the success of dietary interventions, whatever they be?
I usually tell patients that when we look at the outcomes of behavioral weight loss programs and interventions without medication, that people should be expecting that a weight loss of between 5 and 10% of their body weight. With medications, that goes up probably to 15 to 20%, especially with the newer meds that are coming on board. And with surgery, it's probably 25 to 30%. Those are averages. People lose more and less than average, but I think averages are useful for expectation management for people. But really, the easiest way to think about weight loss, the more weight that anybody wants to permanently lose, the more of life they have to permanently change. It's just respecting the fact that there will be things that are not changeable. Those genes and hormones, different medical issues, social determinants of health that aren't changeable, and some stuff that people won't want to change, because food indeed is a pleasure, and it is more than just sustenance. And so, what it means is, sure, there will be things that people can change that'll help them to lose weight, for sure, everybody. But there will also be things affecting weight that people either won't be able to change or they won't want to change, which is why I think it's a mistake to set sort of pound-based weight loss goals for anybody.
Okay. I like one thing that I just wrote it down that you said there, that permanent loss is going to mean permanent change. And this is, when I ask the questions about diet, in my mind, to me, diet is like this term that doesn't mean anything, because it is a lifestyle. It's a lifestyle choice. And as you said, whenever I speak to athletes about nutrition, I say to them, I don't care, keto, whatever, I'm not anything. I just, there are some principles that I use when selecting food and cooking and whatnot, but I don't ascribe to a particular thing. But I do tell them that whatever you decide to do, this has to be something that is sustainable, meaning that it's a lifestyle decision, right? Like, you have to say, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to change my life in such a way that this is how I cook and eat and consume food is a part of that lifestyle. So yeah, I like permanent loss equals permanent change.
And people often try to change way too much at once, right?
Yes.
This is an evolution. I think about my lifestyle. So I wasn't always interested in health or nutrition, or in that sense with food. I remember in med school, I actively skipped many of the nutrition lectures. I ended up starting to explore this when I was a family doctor, and I had all sorts of patients just saying, well, what diet should I be on? And I had no clue. And so I started learning more, and I really liked it. So I kept going down this path. My wife and I remember we were living together in this walk-up apartment, and we had, like, our fridge and freezer was full of boxes. Like, we bought, we had boxed chicken fingers, and we had pierogies, and we had burritos, and that's what was in our kitchen. And then she became pregnant with our first kid, and we're like, we should probably learn how to cook. Like, this is probably a good idea. And then over the years, we've continued to evolve to the point where, we cook virtually everything from scratch, like literally, like we bake our own bread, we cook, 95% of our meals are home cooked meals from fresh whole ingredients, and we're decent at it. But it's been 22 years. Like, it wasn't all at once. And sometimes people, they try to do the all at once route and they crash and burn. If I tried to live with my current lifestyle, fitness wise and food wise, I work out, probably 5-6 hours a week. If I was trying to do that and cook and do all the things that we find straightforward in our lives right now, back then, I would have quit within a month, without question.
No doubt. And it's just, it has to be sort of bite-sized, consumable changes that are sustainable. Because
and going back to the very beginning of our talk, we have immense privilege in my home. Immense privilege, like really, like and I see that, I know that. So I don't want anybody listening to think that I'm discounting that. There's no question that without that, I would not be doing this either. I think to some of the challenges some of my patients face in their lives, and there's just no way I would be living this lifestyle facing some of the challenges that so many people face.
So I just making a note here because I'm going to add on a question, and then we'll come back to this. But let's move on for a second. So one of the things you touched on earlier is pharmaceuticals, and we've alluded to this a few times. General question, what is the role of pharmaceuticals in the management of obesity?
Same as the role of pharmaceuticals in the management of any chronic non-communicable disease. So, I think it's a huge mistake to think of these as any different. So, people have high blood pressure, for instance. There's lots of lifestyle things people can do that in many cases will help. People could go on low sodium diets and exercise, sleep, lose weight, meditate. But doctors don't moralize, nor do patients, around whether they should or shouldn't do that. You show up in your doctor's office with high blood pressure, part of the discussion, not the whole discussion, but part of it is going to be meds. Here are the meds. Here's what they do. I think our job as physicians, and I think the job of these medications fits right into it, is to provide patients with information about their different options. So included in those options for people who qualify from a medical need perspective, so body mass index of 27 with medical issues related to weight, or body mass index of 30 without, they are candidates for medication, and they should be discussed with people. People who have a body mass index of 35 and above with medical comorbidities, or 40 and above without, they should have a discussion about surgery. It's not our job to decide for patients what they should do. It's our job to tell people what are the options. And the meds now are pretty damn good. So if we had this discussion a decade ago, I would have been a lot less enthusiastic about the meds because they really weren't very good. We had meds that made people malabsorb dietary fat, and so they had fecal urgency and accidents, literally. And so those meds didn't lead to much behavior changes or dietary changes because people just avoided the meds, or they didn't work. Then we had meds that had some impact potentially cardiovascularly, so they got pulled from the market, but they didn't even lead to that much weight loss. The new generation of drugs, they're extremely well tolerated. They're leading people to weight losses, certainly in the double digits, often, 15% or more. Some are really strong responders, losing surgical amounts of weight loss. And suddenly, that people who are on these meds, they tell me very plainly, like, this is how I wanted to feel, in the sense that they're not fighting the current of hunger and cravings and fullness, because that's what these drugs work on. And suddenly left without the sort of genetic physiologic push towards more and different choices, they are very much able to navigate the world in a way that keeps them consuming less, liking what their life is like with less, and not regaining their weight. So that's a long answer for me to say that our job is to tell people what their options are, and finally we have great pharmaceutical options, and being on one does not mean you're failing. And by the way, you can be on a great pharmaceutical option and still focus on lifestyle change, and probably should if you're able to, just like every other chronic medical condition we have. But we only moralize about this one.
Mhm. I don't know what pharmaceutical agents that you have in your toolbox or that you use, but I know of two physicians at my hospital who are on Ozempic,
Yeah.
and
So,
they literally look like somebody put in a syringe and went
but you
like
should also
those.
ask them about how they feel. What's remarkable about these meds is that it takes away the fight that people have been taught to believe was their own personal failure.
Mhm,
That
mhm.
is empowering. It helps people's mental health, their brain space, to not have that sort of, oh my God, it's just I don't want it badly enough. I'm not trying enough. When no, it's just that we don't have gauges on our arms for our hormones and gut peptides. If we did, we'd be hungry making weird choices, and we'd look at our arm with the gauge and say, oh, it's because my GLP-1 levels are low, or because my ghrelin is high, and that's why I'm eating this way. But without those gauges, what do? We tend to default into thinking this is a choice we're making personally, whether it's for mood or whether it's for boredom or whether it's for whatever. When really it's just we've got a current that we now are starting to be able to turn down or turn off. So semaglutide, which is Ozempic, is one of the drugs we use quite frequently. Its older brother, liraglutide. That's a daily version of weekly semaglutide. That works well as well. Those are the main drugs utilized right now. There's a few other ones, but I'll be honest with you, they don't work all that well. But there's new ones coming down the pipe. Tirzepatide, which was approved in November in Ontario for diabetes, looks even better than semaglutide, with people losing on average, I think it was 22% of their body weight with this drug. It's amazing. It's not a bad thing. It's a great thing, to have meds that would preclude the need for surgery, that allow people to live lives that they wanted to live, but were elusive because of things that were beyond their control, clearly. Because if with this medication, it's suddenly within your control, it wasn't about desire, and so I'm thrilled that we have them. I've been doing this job for 20 years. I wish we had them 20 years ago, but it's a great thing, and I think it will erode a lot of societal weight bias. We saw that to some degree with mental health and medications that were used there. There was a time where people just were thought to not be trying hard enough with their mental health. That is not a common belief anymore. And the idea that people can get prescriptions for their mental health, for depression, for anxiety, for whatever, is no longer, doesn't have the negative connotations it did even 30 or 40 years ago. And I suspect it'll be the same for obesity 30 or 40 years from now.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's move on. One of the other points that you brought up was talking about people first language, and I was like, what is he talking about? I had to look it up, and when I did, I was interested to see on the website talking about people first language and obesity. They talked about all of the medical associations and groups that had signed on to change the way that they spoke to reflect this. And I saw on there, one of the ones at the top was the American Academy of Orthopedic Surgeons. Why is it that I'm just hearing about this now? Like, I didn't even know what it is. But anyway, so let's go. The question is, what is the importance of people first language when speaking about obesity?
Well, it's important for almost all chronic medical conditions and diseases. I'll come back to the ones it's not in a moment. But people first language just is the notion that a disease does not define an individual, does not define who they are or what they are.
Mm-hmm.
So a person is not described as obese. It's not an obese person. It's a person who has obesity. There's a big difference there, especially when it comes to obesity, where there's so many negative connotations associated with the word and the condition in society. To describe people as obese or morbidly obese, that it leads to stereotype and stigma. And certainly, I think, reinforces stereotype and stigma. People are not their medical conditions. We don't describe people as being cancerous. They are people who have cancer. And so I'm only aware of two communities where they say, you know what, no, I for the most part, people first language is not what we want. And that's the deaf community and the autistic community. I do think it's up to the community to sort of determine the way they want to be approached. But in general, I think when it comes to chronic medical diseases and conditions, I think people first language is always wiser. And with obesity, it's an easier one in my mind to see why in the context of the stigma with the word obese. But it's a very straightforward, easy thing to do. And you'll find some people who push back on it, including people with obesity who say, no, I think it's fine. You will never have any issue with 100% agreement. But certainly the various patient advocacy organizations out there for working with people with obesity prefer people first language. The research on stigma and language would suggest it's valuable as well. And I think it's just good practice for us as clinicians for all medical conditions. Other common ones, another one would be diabetics. People call people with diabetes diabetics. They are not their disease. They're people who have a condition. And that's really the nature of people first language.
Sure. Now, but one add-on question that I'll ask you, given the stigma that is so associated with the term obesity, do you think that it will make that much difference, when someone says, oh, the obese man or the man with obesity? Because as soon as you hear the term obesity, people are, oh God, right? Like,
sure. So yeah, I do think so, especially over time. I think that language shapes impressions of things in a big way. And again, if we go back to the tenor of much of this discussion was this pushing back against the idea that obesity is a choice. So if someone is obese, it suggests that's a choice. If they have obesity, I think it suggests that it's just something that they have. Yeah. And that they're not choosing it for themselves. And so I think it fits in that discussion as well.
And over time, then, as people start to use that language more, oh, this is just something that you have. Right? Then it's like, okay, well, it's not your fault. And then it becomes, okay, well, how can we deal with this problem, whatever it is?
Sure. And again, I think I'm happy to be having this discussion. I'm enjoying it, but I will say that I would be surprised if there'd be an interest in this discussion in 20 or 30 years from now, because I think by then there will be a lot more understanding and acceptance of this is not a choice. There's meds that help. People are on them. They're doing great. And I look forward to that time. Hopefully I'll still be around to see it, but I really do believe that we're going that way. I've been doing this 20 years. We wouldn't have had this discussion 20 years ago either. 20 years ago, we were in a place where nobody was talking about this stuff. There was no interest in hearing about it. It was only the possibility that people were morally failing themselves, and that's why they had this problem. And so the fact that we're now at a place where we're discussing it, that's progress. And I think there'll still be more progress.
Okay. So second last question, because I added on one, one thing that we were talking about before we started recording is just when I was explaining to you the message that I was trying to convey in my video. So the question that I have for you, so you're the expert and you get to have the money shot here. So in your opinion, how should we frame the discussion about the balance between the health effects of the condition of obesity versus the psychological effects that surround the condition of obesity?
I think we treat the person in front of us. So first of all, as we mentioned earlier, I think if you're a family physician, every single person, or if you're just counseling people about, lifestyle in general, counsel everybody. So it's not like there's any different treatment for people with or without obesity. That's number one. Number two, I think that, when it comes to risks and benefits, we are responsible as physicians to explore and explain risks and benefits. But the way I usually recommend it when I'm giving talks to primary care providers around obesity is you can ask the patient really plainly, do you have any concerns about the impact of your weight on your health or your quality of life? They may say no, in which case that's okay. It's just like, we don't judge or moralize around the person who is not addressing one of their other risk factors. I mean, it's just a risk factor. It's not a guarantee. Now, we as doctors can run tests. So you could run blood tests, take a look and see if they've got any conditions that might respond to weight loss. And then I think it'd be certainly reasonable to say, you know what, I noticed that your hemoglobin A1C is now in the pre-diabetes range. And certainly we know that even a 5% weight loss can be beneficial. Is that something you'd like to discuss? They may say no, and that's okay. They are allowed to not want to discuss it. And I think that's all. We just need to be respectful of the fact that scales don't measure the presence or absence of health. And there's no question that at both extremes, very light weights, very heavy weights, there's a lot of risk. They still aren't guarantees. And, if we've got a medical reason to discuss it, great. We can discuss it in that context and ask the patient if they want to discuss it in that context. But we should never assume that the person with obesity is going to develop any problems. And we shouldn't assume that they necessarily are affected by it from a quality of life perspective. We can literally ask and respect the answer. And that's the way I would see our job in that regard.
Okay. So my last question, and I don't have, I didn't actually write out a formal question, but something that you mentioned caught my interest, and I just want to expound upon that a little further. So one of the things you talked about is your own change in lifestyle over the past 20 years, and you talking about the amount of time that you spend being active in a sort of concentrated or dedicated fashion, 5 to 6 hours per week. So we have that. That's just sort of an average or a general idea of activity. Now, let me speak for a moment. One of the things that I do in our place, we do some corporate education. And one of the things we talk about is the sitting disease. So I have a lecture or a talk about the sitting disease, in which I talk to people about the benefit of being active throughout the day, particularly if they work in a workplace setting and they're sitting at their desk all day. And on one of the slides, I talked to them about a study which you may be familiar with, where they were looking at a number of different causes of morbidity and mortality, including cardiovascular problems. And so they were looking at they looked at a cohort of patients. They all happened to be bus drivers in the UK. And this study was good study in some respects, because they had a population where they could match all of the individuals for everything: age, sex, education, all things. And then the test condition, which for this group of patients, was either the people who were drivers, who were more sedentary, and the people who were ticket takers. Everything else was matched. And so they looked at obesity, cardiovascular disease, and all these a number of other conditions, and they found that the patients who for the drivers, generally speaking, when matched for all other factors, their incidence of these problems was higher. Okay, and so the reason why I talk about that study is because I'm trying to drive home to the people that exercise and sedentary activity are independent variables. And it's not to say that exercise is not important, but if you sit all day long, you can still work out a ton at the crap at the end, work out a crap ton at the end of the day. But the effects of that full day of sedentary activity are still going to have their own independent effects. So that's a big, long introduction to get to the question, which is, what should we tell people with respect, if we're talking to, like, there's lots of different ways to deal with lifestyle and to manage our activity levels and weight. But if we're talking to people about activity, how should we talk to them about activity? Should we be encouraging them to, you got to work out 3 times a week, 4 times a week, but
for sure,
amount of time? Or should we be saying, you should be incorporating movement, blah, 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 throughout your day, every day, or some combination of the both? Like, what should we be talking to people about?
So I boil it down in my book to some is good, more is better, and everything counts. And that's the approach that I would recommend people take. I think it's a mistake to suggest there's best exercises, just like there's a mistake to suggest there's best diets. The goal is as much as a person can enjoyably sustain. If a person likes a particular thing and not another thing, I think trying to find ways to do more of the thing that you like is a good idea, even if there's benefits to the other thing as well. You know, I think about weights and cardio and weights, and some people love cardio, some people love weights. You know, ideally you want to be doing both and you want to be less sedentary overall, of course. But if you've got somebody who loves one, hates the other, you know, maybe spend more time cultivating the love of the one than worrying about trying to get them to do the thing that they hate. And as far as amounts go, there's been some research I'm sure that you're familiar with as well that would suggest that people setting out to find small quantities of exercise multiple times a day often have an easier time accumulating exercise than the people trying to do the big bites. Now, again, we talk about privilege. My privilege is I've got a gym in my basement and I can go downstairs and my family's self-sustaining and I can do my workout in the morning and I'm done. But that's not the case for a lot of people. And the time involved in going to and from a gym, again, the money involved, the health involved, the social determinants involved, they're not small. And so, yeah, encouraging people to do whatever they can enjoy as much as they can enjoyably do it, and also give them permission to have setbacks, because no doubt, whether it's injury or illness or travel or who knows what, it is going to fall apart. And I know before I got sort of consistent at exercise, which was when I turned 40, before that, I'm 51 now. Before I was consistent, I was a cyclical exerciser like so many people. I'd be good for a few months. I'd be crappy for a few months. I'd be good for a few months. Sometimes the few months would be 6 months. Sometimes it'd be 2. But, you know, it really was in part because I had this belief that, you know, I needed to, it was all or nothing. And all or nothing thinking in lifestyle change is a huge plague. We see it in diet, we see it in fitness, and it trips up both all the time.
Well, so I want to end by saying that this has been a phenomenal discussion, and I've learned quite a bit. Now, before I sign off, is there anything else in summary that I may not have asked you that you think is important or worthwhile to mention to the people who are viewing?
Yeah, we covered a lot of things, but again, the philosophy for us has always been really simple. Weight-wise, your best weight is whatever weight you reach when you're living the healthiest life you can enjoy. And that's what everything sort of comes back to. And it really varies between individuals and even within individuals. And I think that really embracing that it's not about getting an A+, and it's not about being the best, and it's not about a particular number, but rather it's about the road and not the destination, is crucial when we're talking about something like weight management, where there are so many factors that are wholly beyond our available levers of control.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time to educate myself.
Oh, it was a pleasure, Chris. Yeah, thank you.
No. This has been quite valuable, and I hope that this is also very valuable for all the people who are watching. And because I think this is something that is a topic that affects very, very, very many people. In particular, I'm sure based on the comments, a lot of people who view my content, and I think that this is something that we can learn about, and not only just today, but moving forward, continue to learn about as it changes. So yeah, thank you very much. It was very valuable.
It's my pleasure. Thanks, Chris.
Not a problem.